Comrades, the European Union is currently attempting to implement two major trade agreements. One with the United States, known as the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, and with Canada, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA. Negotiations for these two treaties have been carried out almost entirely in secret. Even our public representatives in Europe know little, if anything, about their progress, and they only see the final proposals and can accept or reject these treaties in their entirety without any amendments. Big business, however, has almost unfettered access to these negotiations. In the preparatory stage for TTIP alone, 590 meetings took place between the EU Commission and lobby representatives. According to official statistics, 92% of these meetings were with representatives of corporations, while in only a few cases there were discussions with consumer and trade union representatives. Indeed, many of the draft texts for these agreements were authored by corporate lobbyists. Comrades, the main aim of TTIP and CETA is the elimination of any barrier or obstacle to the profiteering and exploitation of multinational corporations on either side of the Atlantic Ocean. If ratified, these deals will further increase the power of big business at the expense of democracy, impacting massively on the environment, health and safety, public services and workers' rights, to name a few. While the cheerleaders of these treaties speak of economic growth and job creation through the so-called harmonisation of laws and regulations, the reality is much more sinister. These regulatory harmonisations will almost inevitably ignite a race to the bottom for regulations in the EU, so that they come to resemble the weaker regulatory systems on the other side of the Atlantic. Despite the claims that these agreements will lead to increased employment and productivity for the EU Commission itself has stated that these agreements are likely to bring prolonged and substantial dislocation to European workers, as companies will be encouraged to source goods and services from the US and Canada, where labour standards, as we know, are lower and trade union rights virtually non-existent. In many areas, such as agriculture and in manufacturing, massive job cuts will occur because of cheaper competition from abroad. If ratified, these agreements will see the creation of new markets through the further privatisation of essential public goods and services, such as education, health, water and sanitary provision, with the introduction of the profit motive into every aspect of our lives, and no possibility of returning already privatised essential public services to public ownership. In terms of the environment and food safety, the dilution of protective regulations and the likely abandonment of the EU's precautionary principle will open up our ecosystems to unchecked exploitation from the likes of fracking, genetically modified crops, unsafe mining techniques and other threats. Many analysts agree that TTIP is a Trojan horse for big food corporations aiming to avoid food safety regulations and undermine sustainable agricultural practices in their rush for profits. Indeed, if agreed, TTIP and CETA would have tremendous impact on our dietary and food safety choices. The abandonment of that precautionary principle of the EU that requires proof that there will be no harm in any new product before it comes to market could open up the EU market to previously restricted products, such as GM foods, meat products pumped full of hormones and growth promoters. As stated earlier, these deals will further increase the power of big business at the expense of democracy. An integral part of both these treaties is something known as the Investor-State Dispute Settlement, ISDS, a mechanism that grants corporations the right to sue in secretive international trade courts governments that they pass laws or enact policies that could reduce corporations' present or future profits. For example, minimum wage and consumer protection legislation. ISDS and similar provisions have already been used to undermine governments who control their people and environment. Even before the legislation is passed, many states have been prevented from introducing socially or environmentally progressive measures for fear of being sued. For example, the US tobacco giant Philip Morris is currently suing the Australian government for billions of dollars over its public health policy that all cigarettes must now be sold in plain packaging. In Europe, the Swedish energy company Vattenfall is suing the German government for 3.7 billion euros over the country's decision to phase out nuclear power in the wake of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Vattenfall has already been successful in their previous challenge to the city of Hamburg and their environmental regulations, which were watered down in the face of this company's attack. In short, comrades, the beneficiaries of these agreements are not the citizens of the EU, the US or Canada, but big corporations. Those who will suffer most from the implementation of these agreements will be the working class, as a result of the inevitable race to the bottom of much of the regulatory framework of labour relations, on the rules of health and safety, and the right to freedom of association, among others. US, Canadian and European corporations will have full freedom to submit the working class of our countries to unprecedented degrees of exploitation. Comrades, we must stand up against these and similar treaties. While we may not have the ability in this case to vote directly on ratification, we can stand up, and by working with our trade unions, civil society groups and others, we can put pressure on the EU to reject these proposals and call for an alternative trade agreement that puts people and the environment before corporate greed. Thank you.
Over the last 10 years, I've been the Director of Elections, Director of Campaigns, when the Workers' Party has opposed the Nice Treaty, and the Lisbon Treaty, and the Austerity Treaty. And we think this new TTIP and CETA have suddenly appeared out of nowhere. And in the public domain, that's true. Information really has only sneaked out. And as we've been told, the debate, the whole discussion has been held in secret. And even the members of the European Parliament are not allowed access to all of the documentation. But the groundwork, to an extent, has been laid 10 years, maybe earlier. Because while we're all aware, to one extent or another, of the Lisbon Treaty, a lot of you aren't aware of probably a more important document, or an equally important document, the Lisbon Agenda. And that set out, as Indy Kenny says, he's going to make the South the best little country to do business in. Well, the Lisbon Agenda sets out to make the EU the best little continent to do business in. And essentially, that is what it's set to do. It wanted to make the EU the easiest continent in which to do business. So what we're seeing when we look at TTIP, what we're seeing when we look at CETA, is actually the aspirations that were in the Lisbon Agenda, which was an agenda, which wasn't a legal document, actually being turned not only into EU law, but linking the law of the EU with the other big capitalist bloc of the United States and Canada.
The anger that I'm feeling. 100 years ago, Comrade Janovich Lenin wrote about this in Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. This is the legislation that copper fastens the exploitation on a global scale and gives the multinational companies free rein, laissez-faire, unregulated exploitation on a global scale. I put it in a parallel with the scramble for Africa. Less repressive methods. It's all being legalised now, and we need to fight this. And Comrade ex-President Fidel Castro talked about the response to this kind of thing has to be global, because this is global in its nature. We are at the highest stage of capitalism, and what can you say? If we don't do something, everything organised labour and people have fought for over the last 100 years will be gone. They're after everything. They're after our assets.